I have very strong opinions about wine and winemaking, which is why people invite me to talk sometimes. And I have to tell you, first of all, I've been apprehensive all day. It's a root day, and it's a really deep root day, and I don't know how things have been tasting today for you, but I'm a huge biodynamic guy. I farm everything I can biodynamic. Things that I can't, like the Tench Vineyard, which we're going to have a couple wines from today, I only don't because I'm adjacent to vineyards that have red blotch and other bugs, and they have not done their proper work to rogue vines out to make sure we don't have the diseases passed across. I share a part of one of my vineyards that's next to a Gamble vineyard. That vineyard has 100% red blotch. I put in a new vineyard 3 years ago. Every plant within the first 5 vine rows adjacent to that vineyard now has red blotch. So I'm forced to, in this case, use chemicals that nuke the bugs into the dark ages. We're putting up sticky cloth on the fence line between our properties to try to capture the bugs that are coming over. A neighbor planted alfalfa last year in an adjacent block for horses. It's the alfalfa hopper that's the #1 transmitter of red blotch. And so now we're having to monitor our neighbors, and all of a sudden it's getting to the point where you have attorneys getting involved saying that if you knowingly have it and you're not doing things to eradicate it, it makes you actually liable. Red blotch is worse than Pierce's disease was, and it's growing each and every day. It's a positive thing for about 2/3 of Napa, because in my humble opinion, 2/3 of Napa is either planted to the wrong row orientation, the wrong varietal, the wrong rootstock, or was not designed with the right trellis system for what we now know to be the best ways to grow grapes. And we're going to go through all of that. But we're going to start with a couple of wines. And I brought 4 of my 2016s. And this is a group who focuses on Bordeaux. I thought it'd be fun to do a mix of the different Bordeaux varietals that I work with. Can I have the Sugarloaf, please? And so the wine on our left, and I go alphabetical because, well, I'm not very bright and it helps me keep everything in line. But this is my Sugarloaf Mountain, and can I sit? Can everybody still see in here? Okay. Well, after I start drinking, I will. I'll try to stand for a bit. But I love Bordeaux. My favorite wine of all time, other than a sweet Riesling, is the '89 Optimum. I've had the bottle 12 times, and I cried the very first time I ever had it. It is a winemaker. I literally have goosebumps right now knowing that I don't think in the United States we can ever make a wine like that. Qualitatively, can we reach those levels? Absolutely, but can we recreate that? Absolutely not. And that wine to me to this day just crushes me when I think about it, and I think about excellence. Excuse me?
You have a friend.
Yeah.
Because I agree with you 100%. I think it's the greatest wine ever made.
It's absolutely stunning.
Wine I ever tasted.
My love of Riesling and Champagne is legendary. I think if you've never had a Klaus Peter Keller TBA, you need to treat yourself to one. A half bottle's $900 a bottle, but I bought 2/3 of the TBAs from Klaus Peter Keller that came into the United States last year, 4 cases, and I drink them by myself for whomever I'm dating at the time, if she really knows wine, and I really think I can love her a lot. But because I've had 2 of them on my birthdays, and great wines are to share, but there's less alcohol in that than a bottle of Michelob Ultra, and so I don't consider it wine. I just consider it a gift of love to myself. But he is my man crush. But getting back to the first wine, so this is a wine from the Sugarloaf Mountain Vineyard, which is the southernmost part of Napa Valley. It is 55% Cabernet Franc, 45% Merlot. I love Cheval Blanc. I don't know if all of you have seen the new futures pricing on Cheval, but It's a tad more than my $195 per bottle. And I struggle sometimes as a farmer to pay for those wines. And I make a Franc Merlot blend because I think Cabernet Franc is such a noble varietal. I think that the floral aromatics that you get from Franc, the blueberry fruit, and the tannins in the back of the palate are one of the most identifiable varietals out there. I think Merlot, I'm a man who loves beautiful women. I think great Merlot to me is much like a beautiful woman. There's curves, there's personality, there's chocolatey goodness, there's all of those great things, and the two together make great harmony in my mind. So with that, I'll say cheers, and everybody, thank you for coming.
Cheers. Thank you.
So when you drive into Napa, do you know where the airport is? So way south. And so you go past the airport to the community college, and you see the rock quarry. This vineyard's on top of the rock quarry. And so it's so cool because they have to put a 5-gallon bucket of dirt for every plant. It's almost like Germany on the hillside. It's very steep, and they have to put in dirt to get the vines to hold. On all of my wines, I use 100% new French oak. I do not use new oak for flavor or texture. If you go to my winery, you can eat out of my drains. I want a clean vessel that's not had anything previously in it for my wines. I pay an extra 100 to 140 euros for every barrel, so I get an extra year to 2 years of stave mill aging, and they guarantee, because I have relationships with all of my coopers, that I get 2 winter rotations, so I get more water and snow going across the wood. So I'm paying more for less flavor and less texture, just so I know that the last thing that touches the inside of the barrel before my wine is flame or water to put it out. But it has been heat sterilized and treated. And I just want to know that if I'm selling the wine at $200 a bottle, which is a substantial amount of money, that my consumer has a safe product. The other thing I'm now doing is every cork is being tested by computer. It goes into a chamber. There has a blast of 40 psi air that goes through it. There's a sensor on the other end that measures TCA, and it guarantees me that every cork is TCA proof. With that said, I've had 2 bottles over the last 3 years come back positive for TCA. They found out that there was some of the seals weren't tight, so it wasn't capturing all of the air, and they've since fixed that. But you have a moral obligation to your end consumer when it comes to your packaging and how you treat the wine at your winery. I go into a winery, if it smells like a winery, I think that's a disrespectful winemaker. It should smell like a bourbon factory. You want to smell wood and sanitation. If you smell wine, that means something's been dripped or dropped, or they spit in the drains. You don't spit in the drains at Bevan Cellars. We will give you a bucket if you decide you'd like to spit, but it should smell like wood and chemicals.
Even during fermentation?
During fermentation, there is wine in the drains. It's cleaned with ozone at the end of every night.
Okay, so you're still not going to be...
So you smell wine in the fermentation room, not in my barrel room,
Okay.
not in the caves where I have spurs, not a chance. I don't fire people because I avoid conflict like the plague, unless they continually make messes and don't clean it up. So you look at my barrels, critics will come in and they say, "Where's the red wine?" I'm like, "The red wine." We clean every barrel every 2 weeks with proxycarb, which is basically OxyClean, then citric acid, then peracetic acid. Then we rinse, and then I turn the misters on for 15 minutes to give me another rinse after that, because I believe in sanitation and in clean wines. I don't want to have to filter. I love being able to use a lower sulfur level because I don't want to lose that extra glycerin. All of these wines are bone dry. People accuse me of having residual sugar all the time. There is 0 residual sugar in these wines. I'm just blessed with high glycerin because of how I farm and because I use much lower SO2 levels than everybody else. So it allows me to capture all of that goodness. And so this is the Sugarloaf Mountain. I'm going to taste it. And again, it's a root day, and you guys are... killing me that I'm pouring wines on a root day. I won't pour for a critic on a root day, not a chance in heck.
How many root days per month?
So you have root, leaf, fruit, and flower days. You want to taste on fruit and flower days. So it's equally divided up, 25% between the three. And I hate to use this term, but it's kind of based on the astrological calendar and barometric pressure. And I've had my team blind taste me on same barrel samples out of the same barrel over 3 months, every 3 to 4 days, to see if I rated them differently on the different cycles, and it's proven out to be true. At least to my palate. I tried to eliminate the placebo effect, and
Did Rudolf Steiner invent these categorizations, or are they post him?
no, most of it goes way back before that even.
Okay.
Yeah, but he was one of the first people, he and Mary Stein, to really push the concept.
You can get this app called Wine, and it will show you.
I don't know why I didn't have it already.
Forgot to ask you.
But with this, I'm getting a fair amount of new oak in this wine today. But I love being able to rub my tongue on the roof of my mouth and feel the glycerin. The acid on it's lively. I also get the Cabernet Franc tannins in the back of the mouth. But I really do like some of those green aromatics. I like that there's a kiss of mintiness that I get from the Franc. I farm my Franc different than most people. I denude both sides of the canopy at set. So I'm removing every leaf from the top of the cluster down on both sides. Do it early enough, I believe, and it's proven out over the last 7 years, it's like going to fake and bake before you go to the tropics. If you already have a tan pre-verasion, your body builds up the ability to hold it off.
When are you pulling the leaves off? At what stage?
At set.
Okay.
The day I'm done with flowering and I see the first bloody berry, I'm pulling at set. And in vigorous vineyards, I'll pull during flowering.
Not the canopy, you're pulling below the canopy.
Everything from the top of a potential cluster and down.
Okay.
I strip everything. The reason being is the pyrazine content, and I love some herbaceous qualities in my wine. You get it here, but pyrazines can't get cooked out after verasion. They have to be cooked out pre. After, all you can do is mask them. So UV penetration into a green grape goes all the way through the skins. It gives you an enzymatic reaction, which gives you a more refined tannin, and it gets rid of some of the undesirable flavors, allowing the more floral and fruit-driven flavors in the Cabernet Franc to come out. So I strip everything. There are people who see it and they're like, oh my God, you're gonna have sunburn. But I farm biodynamic, but I then believe in protecting my investment. So I'll put shade cloth on and off a vineyard before every heat spike. Most people just put it on. I'll take it on and off and just pay for that extra labor because I want to have as much airflow and natural sunlight the rest of the time is possible. But we're now doing things like, everybody knows what a lateral is, a shoot that grows off of a shoot. So now trying to get cellular division to happen in the skins so I get thicker skins, I'm trying to get the vine to become reproductive. So early on, I'm stressing the vine as much as possible to get it to be convinced that it does not need to develop deeper roots or thicker wood. I want it to think, okay, I'm stressed, so I need to start putting more emphasis into my berries so they're thicker, they're more flavorful, they're gonna attract things to eat them and propagate them. So I'll do things like winter water aggressively a month before we're gonna start to see bud break. So there's a cycle called a root flush where the roots will literally flush and pull moisture back in and flush again. During that root flush, I want to have a lot of water. Even if it's been a wet winter, I'll water right before I know root flush is coming. So they're pushing everything out and can start clean. That way you're going to have a lot of the nutrients pushed out during root flush. And so I'm reducing the carbohydrates so there's not as much energy right off the bat for things to get going. So we'll water during the wet season.
Doesn't that affect the roots though? Don't they not grow as deep when you're doing that?
During the winter, it doesn't have that impact. So J rooting in high root base, I'm a week out of a sling after shoulder surgery. So I still have this baby arm and I can't go above this. So if I'm doing this, it's gimpy baby arm, yes. So J-rooting comes if you water in short amounts during the summertime and they'll come back up. In the winter, that's not necessarily the case. And then I try to virtually dry farm everything after that. They use pressure bombs to measure the water holding capacity of leaves to tell you the level of stress. I stress my vines to the bejeepers, like they do in France. I do not want to irrigate unless I definitely have to. But we're now doing things like, to stress it, taking the lateral, leaving the lateral, and pulling all the leaves off of the lateral until it gets out of the fruit zone. So it's not providing shade, but it's being an energy suck on the vine to further stress to give me smaller berries and in more intensity. So we're now looking at, the vines are so smart. It's so cool. You pick a vineyard and you walk it a week later and the leaves know to turn yellow. It's like, okay, kids are gone. I'm packing it in. In a vineyard right next door that hasn't been picked, they're green for another 3 or 4 weeks. Vines know what they're doing. There's an intelligence there that we don't know where it comes from, but to quote Jeff Goldblum, nature finds a way. And we're now doing everything we can to try to trick her and get the most development we can. This is a site nobody ever worked with. The owners of the vineyard offered the fruit free to 5 of the major highly regarded winemakers in Napa Valley. People were like, no, you can't make great wine down there, blah, 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 blah. In the last 6 years, I've either gotten 100 or 99 points for this wine every year. It comes down to finding great site and then managing those sites and just making it happen and thinking like a grapevine. And at this site, it just requires removing every leaf and treating them as aggressively as possible.
And this is sugar.
This is Sugarloaf, yes. So I should probably look at my notes before I cover everything without going in order. The wine next to it, the Pure Tench Vineyard Cabernet Sauvignon. So I know Brian's been a member of the Commanderie for a very long time. Has any?
He was 12.
Excuse me?
Since he was 12.
The way he talks, certainly. Has anybody ever been to the Tench property? So we share a fence line with Screaming Eagle, and Brian's children and I leased it from the family trust for 35 years. And so I've taken over farming and control of the Tench Vineyard. And this is the block right along the road that looks like Châteauneuf-du-Pape. The vineyard is almost all small stones that have rolled down from the top of the mountain, and the soil is deep red. And those soils just give you a very intense wine that has blackberry and cherry and just is really fruit powered, but then has very supple, beautiful tannin structure on the back of the palate.
We couldn't really see all the details of the labels as they were being poured, so could you just run through?
Yes, sir.
The second and third are both Tench.
So we have,
the third one's EE, and
so the first wine was Sugarloaf. Second one is Tench Cabernet Sauvignon per Tench. The third wine is the Tench EE, which is 65% Cabernet Sauvignon, 30% Franc, 5% Merlot. And the last wine is the Wildfoot Vineyard Cabernet Sauvignon from Stag's Leap. So, talking about
they're all 2016.
all 2016s, yes, sir. I have to sell everything I make as soon as possible to pay for the next cork. It's, yeah. My library includes less than half of all of the wines I've ever made because we've oversold in our zeal just to build a business. But
So you've got Sugarloaf, Cab Sauv, Pure Tench, then Tench EE, and then what's the fourth?
Cabernet Sauvignon from the Wildfoot Vineyard, which is adjacent to Schaefer. And the Wildfoot's named Wildfoot Vixen Block Jeannie Phillips, who used to own Screaming Eagle, owns the Wildfoot Vineyard, and she replanted it. And when she bought the property, there was a mother fox with a bunch of kits that were running around this part of the property. So she named it Vixen Block for the mama fox. But with the Tench Cabernet Sauvignon, St. George rootstock, and that leads me right into my next thing. Looking at climate change in California, whether you believe in climate change or not, the last 20 years have been the hottest 20 years in record until we got to this year. And there's a lot of people saying, boy, they're going to be growing Cabernet in Oregon pretty soon. It's so much hogwash. You guys were with Bart and Daphne today. Bart and Daphne, the Islay vineyard that made them famous, is up in Calistoga, which is 4 degree days warmer than it is in Oakville. The amount of change we're going to have to see, even at aggressive trajectory analysis says we need 40 years for there to be that much difference in Oakville to Calistoga. And if you look at Napa Valley, as I was saying earlier, so much of it was misplanted. The rootstocks people chose were not right for their areas. We now can devigorate or vigorate soils based on what they need. Row orientations were wrong. We're now finally getting the right southwest row orientation, so the sun's over the top in the middle of the day, so you're not having to worry about the fruit getting cooked. We're getting the right varietals. Goodness gracious, there's so much Cabernet planted in this valley in dirt that should be Pinot Blanc because it can say Napa Cabernet. It's a sin. But so the Oakville Growers meeting was last night. I'm just going to be brutally honest. And I spoke at the Oakville Growers meeting last year, and I said, folks, we are now embarrassing ourselves. If you come to the Oakville Growers Association and you go through the wines, a third of the wines that are being poured are not grown in dirt that should represent that varietal qualitatively because it says Oakville, they know that it's going to sell. We need to now set up a blind tasting panel to approve every wine that's going to be poured at the Oakville Growers Association public events because there are people capitalizing on the name Oakville that shouldn't. Furthermore, it's time to break it up much like the Italians in a DOCG program, where if you have great dirt and you farm at a high level, that needs to be acknowledged. If you're farming at a low level and putting cab in the wrong spot, you should not get to have that symbol on your bottle. We need to take back relevance of excellence in Napa Valley again. There are too many people that are just sitting on their backside and not honoring the soil and being the caretaker of the dirt that they need to be. And Oakville's probably the worst, in my opinion, of that. I will not name names, but it offends me to taste some of the wines that are out there and being made because of that. So back onto my notes. So I have the ability to break my neck falling off of a soapbox. But going back to vineyard design, so Napa Valley probably should be about 25 to 30% Cabernet Sauvignon. If we wake up, the greatest varietals in this valley oftentimes have been made with Merlot, and we have so much heavy clay in the middle of this valley that should be Merlot or possibly Franc, and people have not embraced it because they're afraid to. I have 2 pure cab wines here, but I make 13 different wines, some years up to 18, some years down to 9. The wine has to be worthy in barrel for me to bottle it by itself. But when I just put red wine on the bottle and I don't tell people what it is, the Merlot-based wines are the ones that sell at public events faster than anything else because it is an absolutely fabulous varietal. But Napa Valley has not gotten over the fact that Cabernet is king and excellence isn't, and it holds this valley back. So the third wine.
How much did you make of each of these wines?
Sugarloaf Mountain was almost 600 cases. The Tench was 700. EE was 325. Wildfoot was about 250. So I really see What's cool is this is the same block of Cabernet Sauvignon. The only difference between 2 and 3 is the Franc, which is grown in the back side of the property next to the Merlot. But other than that, the barrel program, the way I make the wines, everything is virtually identical. And you really see how the Franc and Merlot pull the wine back and give it another level of refinement. Okay, I told them I wouldn't go much past 5:30, and I'm a third of the way through my notes.
As long as you like, we're in
I then like to talk about canopy management. And earlier I was talking about how we're a few people are doing extreme leaf removal and removing of laterals. The labor issue here is absolutely legend. I pray that tonight's election sends a message and we can get decent immigration plans in place so workers can come and everybody can have fresh vegetables and continue to drink great wine. This year after the fires, the number of workers that normally harvest grapes and work in the vineyards is greatly diminished because those guys can make $4 more an hour swinging a hammer, and viticulturists are stealing crews from other viticulturists. And the good thing is these poor workers who kill themselves and go through so much to be here to farm these grapes for us, they're getting almost a fair wage now because it's up to $22 an hour from $16 3 years ago, which in the big picture, they're still underpaid because these ladies and gentlemen do such backbreaking work. And when you're driving up and down the road during the middle of the day and they're working, they're wearing 4 layers to keep the moisture in. And you look at them at the end of the day when they sit down, they are drenched through and through. It is backbreaking work, and it's a sin that they're getting paid what they are. But we need more people, and we look to Australia for mechanization because Australia, as I think all of you know, is the only place that spends money on research. They tax every gallon by 10 cents, regardless of the price point. So most of the great heavy lifting intellectually in the wine world is all being done in Australia right now. California has nothing in place. Bless Washington State, they now have a small little tax, but the amount of research dollars in grapes per the size of the crop is one of the lowest in the country. And we're greatly lacking behind. But when it comes to canopy management, the best canopies qualitatively we have now, we know is no longer the vertical. The vertical gives too much sun exposure. You don't get airflow through it. It creates shade. You don't get dappled light in the middle of the canopy. We need to go back to the spreads in getting things up. The problem is mechanization doesn't accommodate that type of canopy management. So to make the best wines possible, we need labor, and we're struggling with it. So to harvest, it's amazing. There are in-field mechanized harvesters that will do vertical trellising that have an optical sorter built in, and you literally then just get bins spit out that are virtually perfect. But it again requires the right type of trellis system. But we're getting there, but most of this valley that has super premium grapes, I will throw out there, boy, how do I not get in trouble? Tokalon is primarily VDP, vertical trellising, and it should not be. So the best days of Napa are absolutely in our future as we learn how to plant better and manage our canopies better. Grape growing is going to improve, and the quality's in the grapes. There's nothing worse than a winemaker who calls himself an artist. Mother Nature's the artist. If you're not a caretaker and a cleaner, that's what a winemaker should do. There could be art in blending a wine, but I believe in Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 hours. That's a skill you can also develop. maybe you've got the artist's soul, but Mother Nature's the artist, and we're still figuring her out in the Napa Valley. Heck, Howell Mountain is still just, we're just starting to understand how to farm up there and on that site. So going to the next wine, the Wildfoot. I love Stag's Leap, the district. The wines have a tension to them and have a bit of a tightness to them, but you get that tension, but then you get that beautiful supple middle that you get with great Stag's Leap wines. And I would encourage you to try the Stag's Leap, the Wildfoot, next to the Tench, and try the Pure Cab side by side.
That would be 2 and 4, correct?
I'm sorry, yes, 2 and 4.
What did you say about the middle of Stag's Leap?
It has the great wines from Stag's Leap have a very round, seductive mid palate, but they still have a tension to them because it's so much cooler down there than it is as you get up to Rutherford and St. Helena.
Russell, I remember the Tench Vineyard from the nickel and nickel days.
Yes, sir.
This is completely unrecognizable from that older time.
I have nothing nice to say, so I'm going to say I hope you prefer mine.
Hugely. It's like night and day.
This wine does not have Brettanomyces. I'll just stop there. I want to be a nice person so bad. What's also really developing in the United States, and boy, the ability to make wines and make wines that are approachable. I had a critic a few weeks ago review all of my wines, and she gave me the lowest scores ever from her publication. And I called her and I'm like, what are you smoking? And she said, well, the wines didn't have the level of phenolic and tannic power that I wanted. I said, that's amazing. I said, can we talk about this? I said, you commented on how dark all of my wines were. And she's like, yes, they're all very dark. I said, and you're a master of wine, so where does color come from? It comes from anthocyanins and tannins. And so the tannin profile has to be there. I said, so I'm going to email you my tannin assays, which show you your tannin load. These wines are much more tannic than the average Napa Cabernet. But we're now doing things differently at my winery. Instead of doing pump overs and punch downs during primary fermentation, I've worked with a company called Pulsair that makes air bubbling devices for other industries. So I'm now bubbling air through my fermentation. So I'm not breaking seeds. I'm homogenizing my temperature. I have no stratification of temperatures. Cap is staying on the top. I'm blowing air. So I have pipes going into the bottom of all of my tanks from the bottom. And I create an air vortex bubbling through.
Is that micro-oxygenation?
It's macro-oxidization. And the company's called Pulsair. So Kilsita Creek uses it quite a bit now, and I use it. I've made 3 different types of systems for it, but what it does is it allows me to capture the skin tannins without the seed tannins. And so the skin tannins are so long, and because they're long and reactive, they bind with the anthocyanins. The longer the phenolic compound, the more seductive it is. So I'm getting these luxurious textures without the tannin. She's like, I don't know that these wines will age. I'm like, Buttercup, talk to me here and taste them again looking at these numbers. Okay, that was not misogynistic. No hashtag me too. I've called boys and men Buttercup too.
So even though the cap is staying at the top, you're getting all the benefit.
Oh, the air completely rolls it. It completely rolls the cap.
So you're getting all the tannins, all the structure, with the cap staying at the top because of the circulation.
Correct, and I don't have a mechanical punch down or pump over that's going to extract the harder tannins from the seeds. And I only do that from 22 bricks down to 5 bricks. I don't do it above 22 because I don't want extra oxygen during the lag phase from cold soak to primary to feed the bacteria that during that lag phase can start to give you some VA. And I don't do it at the end because the yeast cells can no longer pick up that much oxygen, so it doesn't really do anything at that point in time. And I don't want to then have oxygen that could feed again malic early, so the malic would start to eat some of my sugar and again elevate VAs and create other issues. But I'm now using that as my primary throughout the middle 75% of the process, and it gives me these great colors and very sexy textures with wines that should age very well. I say should, I've only been doing it for 7 years, but the wines I've been doing for the last 7 years are still infants in their evolutionary process.
We are amateurs. These wines will age 20 years absolutely perfectly. There's no doubt about it. She's a complete nutshell.
It's what her predecessor, Mr. Parker, said all the time. But yeah, she only docked me 1.5 points on each of them. But still, I'm a tad competitive.
So how did she react? Has she come back to retaste?
She agreed to come back and retaste in February.
Right.
So no, she's been completely open-minded about the topic and receptive to retasting.
She's just never tasted this level of tannins and anthocyanins this smooth.
Made this young, correct. Yeah. And I don't know if you guys have gone back and tasted the Sugarloaf, but it's changed so much since our first sip. Yeah, I love Franken Merlot. Okay, notes. Okay. Okay. I do in mid harvest. I certainly do. Towards the end of the season, it's so cold in the mornings that I'll pick in the mornings. But yeah, anything picked in the mid-September to first part of October, everything is night picked. A lot of people are night picking though at midnight and the pulps of the grapes haven't cooled. I've gone to Brasswood where I make one of my wines for clients and gone to people that have had night picks, and I've put a thermometer in their bin and I'm like, it's still 76 degrees. Night picking makes sense if there's been airflow and it's cooled down. If not, if you're not picking before until after 4, they haven't cooled down enough. Late season we pick, and sometimes we pick, it's so cold, the wine's cold soaked too long naturally, and we have to put fins in them to heat them up. But yes, I love picking at night. And I live in the middle of a vineyard, and I love walking around watching everybody night pick. I think it's just so cool. It's, yes. And I do believe in having female pickers. I think the ladies do a cleaner pick than the guys do. The guys get so competitive and they're being paid by the ton, and they get rocking and rolling, and the trash talking they do is worthy of Michael Jordan. They push the guys that aren't going as fast because they want to pick as many tons as fast as possible. So I normally request female crews. So the last thing on heat mitigation. People that are planting in Napa right now, if you're buying land, you have the money to treat it properly. And I have 3 vineyards now that have pulse misters that instead of irrigating very often, we have pulse misters to cool the heat once it the fruit once it gets hot. So we have thermostats set in the fruit zone. When we have more than 25% of the fruit zone at 96 degrees, we will pulse water all through the fruit zone. We can also use the same technology for frost protection, which hasn't been a problem in the last 10 years, but would work to cool the fruit down. So you look at the last 6 years with the crazy heat we had, there's been so many days where there was no flavor development because the vines got too hot and you had shutdown. Now, by just misting, which is more effective than overheads, but overheads still work, you can keep your vines going throughout the day to not shut down. And so this year we've had a great season because it was cool. The last 2 years, all of my vineyards that had pulse misters, the pHs were almost, well, let's say the average pH I pick at is 3.6. These vineyards would have been around 3.5. They maintain their acidity and the freshness of fruit at such a higher level that we're now putting in pulse misters in almost every one of the vineyards that I have complete control in. And you know, when you look at the fact that the valley's not planted right, most people aren't mitigating with shade cloth and water and everything else, the future for Napa is absolutely huge, as long as the current owners and new owners come in and realize we're just the caretakers and they do everything they can to look at the changes in climate and back on the chemicals we're using, and neighbors respect neighbors, and when there are vineyards that aren't healthy, they get pulled out. And Napa's golden age is in front of us. Technology on making wine, bottling wine, and everything gets better every year. I feel bad that Napa's now so expensive that new wineries can't come in here and get started. I started 16 years ago because somebody gave me a ton of grapes. I couldn't get started again as a new vintner. The best and brightest minds coming out of Davis and Fresno are going to the Sonoma coast. They're going to Paso Robles. They're going everywhere else but Napa because they can't get jobs here. And I'm being a hypocrite when I say this, but there's so many wines being made by so few, as I make wine for 8 clients, and the recipes don't change that much from place to place. And there's a layer of homogenization that's occurred that I think is also a bit disrespectful to the valley. But the cost of buying a vineyard is so high, you want to pay for somebody who's gotten 10 100-point scores if you're going to make that huge investment and put your name on the bottle, which most of the new people to the valley have done. So the stress in Napa is very high because of the cost of dirt and the level of narcissism of so many of the owners and the lack of competition from new, smart, young minds pushing the old guard into place. So I look at this valley, the farming's only going to get better, and hopefully people start to realize we need a broader perspective when it comes to our winemaking people and teams and practices. That's all I got. Oh, please, I'm happy to answer any
So what
question.
does I get sort of a pleasant chalkiness on the Tench EE that I don't get on the other.
The Franc, yeah, the
Yeah,
Cabernet
is it
Franc
Franc,
just has
does it?
a slightly a bigger tannin.
In a loud voice so everyone can hear.
I'll repeat the questions in case if you want it on the video.
Great. My question was, you're adjacent to Screaming Eagle. You've got very strong views about planting. Are they planted properly?
The question is what do I think about Screaming Eagle's planting? And you know, they've replanted 2/3 of that vineyard, and I worked with Jeannie Phillips, the previous owner, that they've done everything humanly possible to plant that to the most exact specifications they have. Do I agree with every decision they make? No. Do I respect everything they've done? And do I think they've done everything in their mind that they possibly can do? Absolutely. Yeah. Their winemaker he loves to make beer more than he loves to make wine. And he calls me dude. And not a lot of people call me Russ or dude, but he gets away with it because he's so charming and fabulous. And Screaming Eagle, in my mind, qualitatively is always excellent, but it's one of the more refined, balanced wines in this valley. In a blind tasting, it rarely shows itself for having a big personality. It's the beautiful lady who you have to spend time with. You have to romance her. You have to get to understand her nuances to fully appreciate who she is. And I'm glad that there's wines like that. most of the people that I know that buy Screaming Eagle and drink it don't understand it, and it's a sin.
So how'd you get the dirt where you're farming right now? How did that, because you came at this from writing, correct? As a critic.
Correct. So all of the vineyards I work with are because of relationships. I purchased the Saunders vineyard next to Della Valle because I worked with Cal Shokit back in the day, and the Saunders wanted somebody to buy their property who would treat it the way they wanted it to be treated. So I paid literally 50 cents on the dollar to buy their vineyard, as long as they could live in the house on the property until they died. And to be the caretaker of that dirt, I said, you bet. The Tench family, I started begging them for grapes when I first started making wine because I loved the dirt and I thought it hadn't been treated properly. And now I'm the godfather over their grandkids, and I'm part of the family. And Jeannie Phillips sold Screaming Eagle, and she wanted somebody with her new projects who nobody had heard about, and she wanted a fresh perspective, so she gave me a chance. Everything's been based on my relationships. Sugarloaf Mountain, they couldn't find a great winemaker to make wine from it, and so they called me up and said, please, we'll pay you to vinify 2 tons, we'll give you the grapes, we'll hull it, we'll pay you to make it, just make something special. And
How can you say no? Which one of these have you been making the longest? These 4 parcels?
the Sugarloaf and Tench, I started both of those in 2011.
A rough year to start.
Yeah, you know what? So I hate to go back to critics and everything. I got my first 100-point wine in 2011, and it was from Jeannie Phillips and her vineyard, and it was because we farmed it differently than everything else. And she said, I want you to feel the freedom of having no financial stress. She says, look at this property, draw me a map, explain to me why, and if it makes sense to me, I'll cover whatever you want to do. And we broke it down from scratch. We started a completely different farming practice. We did everything different, and that's what gave me the confidence to move forward with that plan on everything I do after that. But it took a woman with a lot of money to want to shake things up to do it. Any other questions before we go order supper?
Okay, what do you think of Brett? What do you think of the Brettiness that is sometimes apparent, often apparent in Bordeaux, as a sort of a marker for Bordeaux?
The question is what are my thoughts on Brettanomyces? I think Brettanomyces as a yeast gives great mouthfeel and texture, and I know why a lot of wineries embrace it. It homogenizes lots. When you're making 8,000 cases, a small amount of Brettanomyces can be a great equalizer, so you don't have huge variation between your lots. It Ridge, Paul Draper inoculated with Brettanomyces exactly for that purpose, because that site didn't give real sexy textures. So he wanted that Brett mouthfeel, and he wanted consistency. I think it's a tool winemakers have. I just love purity of fruit, and to me, my vineyards, the lots are all small enough, and I don't want anything to take away from what Mother Nature delivered to me at the winery.
I get gorgeous fruit. Yeah, this is just so many different notes.
And they're going to continue to change considerably. I hope people are willing to take them in and still taste them during supper.
What sort of age are you thinking about as when you'd ideally drink your wines or a range? And do you think it's any different from what your customers are thinking or going to do?
The question was what is my optimum drinking range, and is it in sync with my customer base? And no, I think most of my customers are inventorying too many of my wines. I think these wines will start to be at peak in about 3 years and then hold for another 7 to 12 if you like mature flavors longer. But I like, if I want tertiary flavor development, I love to drink Bordeaux. I love to drink Nebbiolo. I think if you're drinking great California Cabernet, Most of them should be consumed in their first 15 to 20 years. There are exceptions, Islay being one of them. Mature Islay Vineyard Cabernet Sauvignon is so distinctive. It is Grand Cru-like in its distinctiveness, and I think it should age. But most California wine, why not enjoy us for what we do best, and that's represent fruit flavor with balance.
Thanks. Thanks.
Well, you're going to have dinner with us, and we can keep talking and asking questions.
Please, you bet.
In the meantime, I have a gift that I'm pretty sure you don't have, because this was a publication by a Commanderie de Bordeaux from Philadelphia, and he was a great collector and an avid drinker. So these are the labels and stories of the first growths from 1928 through 2005.
Wow.
I suspect the 89 Obrion will be in here, but thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much for
Nice having you.